Hey, what's up guys? Sir Emanon here, and welcome to another episode of Road to 1000 DuelingBook Rating. This is actually going to be episode 10 in the series, and it's going to be the first episode of actually Trap Shaddolls, which is pretty exciting. So this deck actually did win the poll that I put up on the community tab, and this is quite a very interesting kind of build that's been sort of rising in popularity over the past couple of weeks here, simply because Pack's obviously been hyping it up quite a lot in his channel. I'll leave a link to that in the description box down below, of course. But it's just a pretty interesting kind of position in the metagame where it gets to play a lot of the really powerful traps this format, but also has the one of the more grindy engines, of course, in the entire game. And this should be pretty interesting from my point of view in particular, because I'm more of a combo player natively. I don't typically play a lot of control decks. Granted, I still do enjoy things like control BA and Altergeist from time to time, but it's been quite a while since I played anything of this kind of degree in recent memory, at least. So that should be pretty interesting, and that will obviously be kind of the cause for some misplays that are going to be inevitable for sure. But of course, that's kind of the point, is to just learn and evolve as time progresses. But let's go ahead and check out the deck list before we get started here. So this is a bit of a modification to Pack's list. I made, of course, some adjustments here, opting to play like Nadir Servant, for example, just to try and capitalize on the fact that, of course, it's such a super strong starter card. So I figured that it's a pretty good inclusion here. I also swapped out some other cards for various different forms of defense. One thing that I'll note here, actually, is that I'm considering cutting Shaddoll Fusion down a bit, which kind of is weird to say, but it's just that there's certain matchups, for example, like Drytron and Eldritch, where this card might not be live as much. Like if they're not on an aggressive Drytron build and they're just ending on things like Vanity's Ruler or Ultimate Nest without going for like the Appaloosa plays, or like Dweller with like the Megalith build, stuff like that. This card typically tends to not be as live, so there are cases where this card can be dead. Granted, it's still really good against Rogue, and it's good in certain instances against VW, where like if they call Dark with their VFD, you can send a couple other attributes and still be able to play the game at least to some degree, and you have traps to back yourself up too. But I figure that this might eventually, in the long term, just evolve into a very much full-on control style of deck. But for now, I figured it was kind of a bit weird to start off with just the one fusion, since a lot of people, I would imagine, are on 3 of this still. So this is going to be kind of just a launching point, starting point, and then I'll kind of make my decisions from there, of course, as is the whole reason for showing these deck lists at the beginning. But without further ado, let's just go ahead and get into the gameplay here. So you guys already read the title, but this matchup is actually going to be against Paleozoics, which should be pretty fascinating. So we do lose the RPS, and obviously going to be forced to go second. So our opener is Shaddoll Beast, Dynamiscus, Schism, Punishment, and Strike. So this hand is okay, but quite slow. Luckily, our opponent also is playing a bit of a slow deck, however. So they start off with a copy of Pot of Desires and then draw a couple of cards, and then end up setting, I believe, 4 cards and then passing. So here I'm trying to think of what the matchup is, because I'm like, all right, Eldritch doesn't play Desires. I doubt it's the Mirror, because the Mirror usually doesn't play Desires either, since you don't really want to banish a lot of your one-of Shaddoll names, since it's a bit of a toolbox. So I'm trying to figure out like what decks in the format play back row and also play Desires, since a lot of the back row decks would also play Extravagance too, things like Geist and Guru and such. So it takes me quite a while to realize what deck this actually is, and for quite a while I actually just can't figure it out whatsoever. So you're gonna see me actually set 5 here, which obviously is a mistake, clogging up your zones like this, because a lot of these cards require your opponent to take actions in the monster department. And if that doesn't end up happening, then I'm just kind of stuck here. So I should have probably just kept the second Dynamiscus in hand right off the bat. For turn, my opponent's going to draw and set another card, and I'm going to draw a Punishment. This is going to happen for quite a while, where you just go into a passing war as a result of me kind of just locking myself from using anything impactful. Like for here, for example, like I could activate Shaddoll Fusion if I had, the spaces to do so, but I literally cannot activate any of these to clear them. So that is the reason why I probably should have just held this in hand. 4 disruptions would have been fine, especially given the fact that my opponent would have just started off quite slow on their own terms. But I'm just going to set the Hedgehog and pass here. Here my opponent sets a monster of their own, and I'm like, all right, so if I can get that to be flipped face up somehow, I can maybe use like a Punishment or a Dynamiscus. I opt not to flip the Hedgehog because I'm anticipating that there's a chance this is the Mirror. I'm starting to kind of dissect what back row there might be. And if it is like a Dynamiscus of their own, then I really wouldn't want to necessarily lose out to that. So I don't really feel too much pressure to make action right now until my opponent actually makes a play, because I have really, really strong defense right now. So I feel as though if my opponent actually makes a push, I have really, really good follow-up. Now, my opponent could also have the same follow-up, which makes this a bit of an awkward scenario. But I feel pretty confident in the position where I'm at, so I actually don't feel any pressure to make any moves right now, which is definitely arguable. But I'm deciding to just play the long game here because I'm confident in my ability to actually grind fairly well. Despite me saying that earlier, I don't typically tend to play these decks quite a lot. We're still in the relatively lower ratings, so I feel pretty decent about my ability to just navigate later, given the resources. So my opponent finally normals a copy of Deep Frog and then goes into Ronin Totem. Or flips it up, rather. And then I decide to actually just wait here. I'm just going to wait until my opponent makes the Toad and then strike it. My opponent was thinking, or thought that I was thinking prior to the summon, but I was just thinking on the summon here. So we go ahead and use the strike on it. Of course, the Toad will add back a resource, but now, more importantly, that just cleared up a zone for me. I didn't want to relinquish my Beast necessarily either. I could have gotten rid of one of my other traps, but at this point, I didn't have enough Shaddoll names to make the fusion live if I got rid of the Beast via Dynamiscus, so I just decided to hold off on it. I didn't really feel the need to punishment because, again, if I wanted to go into Shaddoll Fusion, that's kind of a conflict there, which is like one of the minor things in this deck that is what's leaning me away from just the fusion kind of focus. Because like this kind of does come up quite a bit where you activate punishment, then you're locked out of fusion. For turn, I draw the Wendy anyway, so the whole point of keeping the Beast in hand just as a name for fusion ended up not mattering entirely. So that happened, but it's okay because now we're actually in a pretty decent spot, I feel. We're going to activate the Shaddoll Fusion, that gets Ash. I don't feel too beat up about that because now we can actually flip with the Hedgehog here, and then we're going to grab the L Fusion. Obviously, they do the same thing in this scenario because my opponent has no extra monsters. So we're just going to go ahead and fuse away for a copy of App Cologne. Here, I'm going to just try and slowly amass some resources. So we are going to trigger the Wendy and the Beast here. So we're going to draw a Dragon, and then we're going to summon a copy of Falco. Falco is really strong in the grind here, just because it allows you to loop your fusions pretty much forever. And if you can loop like Construct and Falco and like or App Cologne and Falco and like Reshadol, you can create a really, really strong cycle where you just basically don't die and can slowly whittle away at your opponent's life points. And I figured that's pretty good in this particular matchup, so that's what I opt to go for. And we also draw a Dragon off the Beast, which is quite nice as well. It will pair very nicely with Dynamiscus later on. But for my opponent has a Dynamiscus of their own, so they're going to banish my own copy of App Cologne, which is fine. And here's obviously, where I am kind of realizing that my opponent actually is in a pretty decent spot themselves because now they have quite a bit of setup for their Paleo traps, and because I'm also playing a very trap-heavy deck, any of my traps are going to prompt his Paleos, and I can't really do a whole lot about that, at least in game one here. So now I got to really think about how to carefully navigate about this. I decided to actually just go and take it a bit slow still, due to the fact that, there's not really a whole ton I can do from this position. And I figured that I'm pretty safe from any ways that he can get to Toe because they drew another copy of Strike. And then I just have more ways to kind of just deal with whatever follow-ups he could have. So right now it's kind of just about stifling my opponent's push. For turn, they're going to draw, and then they're going to go for Reckless Greed and then chain the Dynamiscus in Graveyard. So that's going to let them draw 2. And then they're going to normal the dupe that they added back off the first Toad, and then go into the second one here in just a sec. Just kidding, I'm going to Dynamiscus here. So I use Dynamiscus on the Dupe Frog. My opponent obviously gets to chain a Canadian off that, but of course I still have more disruptions here. So we're going to get rid of the Dragon, and of course Shaddoll's trigger off Dynamiscus because they send for effect, not for cost. So we are going to be able to trigger the Dragon and get rid of my opponent's Imperial Order, which my opponent actually had for both the Shaddoll Fusion and the El Shaddoll Fusion, so it's kind of interesting that they didn't go for it. But nonetheless, we are going to try and use the Schism here. The goal is just to try and get like a bigger body on the board. That way my opponent can't just like go into Toad. Like I want to summon this or activate this before they go into Toad. Because even though I have Strike here, just in case they have like maybe a Judgment main deck for some reason, it's possible. But my opponent has another copy of Dynamiscus, so they're just going to banish the Schism. I actually get to trigger my own Dynamiscus here, so a bit of an interesting Paleo, I wouldn't say mirror, but just this is kind of how parallel mirrors looked back in like 2017. But gonna go for a toad, and here I'm just gonna strike it again. Basically, just keep my opponent off of it, because that's really the only way that Paleo can actually apply pressure. Since if my opponent can stop me all that he wants, but I innately just have more aggressive monsters in my engine than he does. So as long as I keep him off of like the ways to just link summon or go into like the big pushes, I'm gonna be winning out on these minor trades. So again, even though we're fairly even on card economy, I feel very favored here. So my opponent is going to set a couple back row. Of course, 4 back row is still quite a lot to chew through, but I'm not really feeling too bad about it. My opponent has 6 cards. Currently, I have 8 here, so it's pretty good. So we're going to draw and then flip up a copy of Falco. We're going to try and get back this beast. And my opponent is going to Torrential here, choosing to do it before the beast actually hits the board. So that'll wipe the board, but I do get to actually trigger the Hedgehog, which is quite nice. So that's going to let me search for a copy of the Aerial, which is good because this allows me to actually eventually bring back the App Clone. And that's how I'm trying to get back into my cycling of resources here. Because as long as I get to a place where I can again loop like Falco with like a fusion and like Trap Shaddoll, that'll just accelerate my grind game much better than what he can produce right now. So that's pretty good. We're going to go ahead and just set a couple more cards and pass. For turn, my opponent is going, or at the end of the turn, my opponent's going to use Trap Trick here. And they're going to chain the Dynamiscus, of course. They're going to actually set Olenoids, but not Olenoids my new set, and actually accidentally pick one of the older ones. It wasn't a misclick. He just thought that was the one that I just recently set. But I set these two. So I'm going to go ahead and chain it. I'm just indicating here which ones I actually just set. But he's going to chain the Dynamiscus to my punishment. The reason I do this here, obviously he's targeting it, but I also want just an opportunity to not only clear his board, but try and accelerate my Shaddoll engine even further. So I go ahead and just send App Clone, and here I decide it's also a pretty decent chance to maybe go for like add back Dragon and then send it to just get rid of the last of his back row. Because even though I mentioned that my engine is quite more aggressive compared to his, even though it doesn't look like it right now, but it has like more ways to get bodies on the board quite more often. If I can just get rid of all disruptions, then it's going to pave the way to OTKing or just getting in for damage much easier. Unfortunately, my outclone does get belled here. So they're going to go for the second copy of Reckless Greed, but I remind my opponent that he's under Trap Trick actually, so that is not going to be an option there. But for turn, my opponent skips the draw phase but goes for the Reckless Greed here, and then chains the Olenoids. And then here I decide, well, I really don't have strike anymore, so I just got to go for more ways to just keep him off of the Toad. And I'm going to go for the App Clone here, add back Dragon, and then get rid of it, and that's going to pop the strike step. So that's quite good. That's going to insulate my plays next turn. He's going to set 3, and I'm thinking, right, he has no draw phase next turn. So I think this is one of the last turns that I really have to kind of weather. And then if I can do that, then I'll be in a good spot. So I draw another copy of Strike, which is good for the event that my opponent can make a Toad regardless. So that's good. But we're going to go ahead and flip up a copy of Beast. That's going to draw us 2 and then get rid of a copy of Wendy here. And then Wendy is going to go and trigger to get Squamata. Here's where I think I made a mistake. I probably should have flipped up the Aerial first because I saw Torrential. And then I ended up actually playing into this Torrential right here. And as soon as I declared Wendy, I was thinking, oh, wait, this actually is really bad if I get Torrentialed because I miss out on my chance to just get the Aerial into the App Clone. And that would have been like really good. So yeah, definitely a misplay here on my end for sure. And here I'm starting to run out of Shaddoll names a bit because I've gone through quite a lot. Like there's all 3 Wendy here. There's 2 Squamata. I went through like all of my 1-ups pretty much. And then there's only 1 more Aerial. So running quite low in the Shaddolls. But I'm going to use Aerial to banish pretty much everything that's relevant in my opponent's graveyard, which is going to set him further back in terms of just making Toad because there's no more Paleos in grave anymore. So I felt pretty good about that at least. And then we're going to send the Resh just in the event that I'm able to stick another copy of Aerial because this list is playing 2. So if I can set another copy of Aerial, that'll be quite good so I can try again to like maybe flip it up with the Resh and then go for the App Clone there. But here we're just going to normal the Squamata. I keep the Wendy in hand because I have Dynamiscus here. So that's like the way that I can get to the Aerial if need be. So we're just going to go for the Squamata and just attack. I don't really see a point to setting it because, again, I have just ways to deal with my opponent's monsters at the moment. And it's not like I have like Shadow Games or anything. My opponent is going to activate the last copy of Reckless Greed here. Yeah, that's the third copy. And then pass. So my opponent is going to set and then go ahead and pass back. I think my opponent misclicked that turn, the end phase button, but obviously just going to let him play that the way he wanted it to because that's a DB sometimes. But we're just going to actually go into battle phase. I figure this is a frog, but I do actually want to just use this Dynamiscus here. So I take the damage, I go for the Dynamiscus, and my opponent just concedes right there. So that was a really, really lengthy, grindy game. This was like a 25-minute grind. Very, very long. How long is this video so far? 15 minutes, yeah. So like that's why I haven't been going too much into detail, because I knew this game was going to be really long to cover, even if I was going relatively fast. So I still want to explain my plays to some degree, but of course, if you guys want to go into detail in the comments, by all means, feel free to. I would love to hear if there were any like minor changes you would make, because those things definitely add up in a deck like this, especially in a matchup that's as grindy as this one. So if you guys have any thoughts, definitely be sure to let me know. But we're going to move into game 2. My opponent's going to go first again. And if you guys are enjoying this commentary, definitely be sure to like this video and subscribe if you're new here and want to see more commentary similar to this style. But let's go ahead and actually show off the sighting, because I almost forgot about that. So here's actually the sighting process for moving into game number 2. It's kind of awkward, and I decided to actually side out Shaddoll Fusions going second, which might be weird, but Paleo has kind of a hard time summoning Toad turn 1, unless if they draw a swap plus a water. So that's like quite a low chance, actually. So I figured that it's actually better to kind of deal with the Paleo traps, because in the end, those are going to be what helps my opponent grind. So I have DD Crows in here and Cosmics, which are there. The Cosmics are there less to just blind hit back row and more to actually chain to stop the Paleos from activating. This was really, really big back when Paleo was super meta. So that's like a really big thing. Same with DD Crow. You can hit the Paleos directly, or you could just chain block and prevent the Paleos from even activating. Like you can like chain, hit a Ronin Totem, and then prevent a Paleo from coming out, which is really nice. And then Feather Duster, of course. I decided to side out TT just because it would be okay against like a big kind of Paleo board, but I figured that the other cards were just more impactful in the matchup. It was kind of hard to figure out what cards to side out, but these were what I ultimately went up with, since everything has marginal utility, but you just have to try and maximize value here. But let's go ahead and just move on to the game here. So our opening hand going second is going to be El Shaddoll Fusion, DD Crow, Strike, Dragon, and Squamata. So not a great hand. We don't have a lot of defense. But we do have a way to actually at least make Winda and then go for at least some of our engines. So that's not horrible. My opponent is going to start off by just setting 5 and passing. And we draw another copy of DD Crows. So this is actually totally fine. And again, the reason why I was comfortable just siding out copies of Shaddoll Fusion, because if these DD Crows were Shaddoll Fusions instead, then they would not be doing a whole ton, because I already had the El Shaddoll Fusion. Well, I guess actually it will come up right here, technically. So I started with El Shaddoll Fusion, and my opponent actually flips up Imperial Order. So I guess if this was a Shaddoll Fusion and I activated, I could just chain the El Shaddoll Fusion. So I guess that's something that could have happened, but that's like a very minor point. My opponent also is going to chain Scapegoat as chaining 3. So I'm thinking if like I want to do anything, but there's nothing really I can do, let's be real. So the Scapegoat resolves, and my El Shaddoll Fusion does not. So we are in a pretty bad situation. Now, I debate on if I want to like attack over a Goat token, because I know that Paleo plays Scapegoat just to go into like Avermax, which is kind of hard for a lot of decks to deal with. We are playing stuff like Ice Dragon's Prison, which is pretty fine, because Avermax is a Cyberse, and generally they make like Link Spiders and Link Rebos first. But I decided to actually just set and pass. My opponent hits me with the Olenoides, which sucks, because I was thinking the reason why I didn't go and attack was that I wanted to like maybe get value out of my Shaddolls being flipped and then just strike the summon of whatever he was using to threaten me with. But the Olenoides in the end phase definitely hurt. Not unexpected though. For turn, he's gonna draw and then go for Reckless Greed, and then I'm gonna chain the. I'm actually gonna chain DD Crow to the Paleo itself, just so that it gets out of the graveyard here. And my opponent goes for a Masquerena, and then goes for Link Rebo, and then for Link Spider. I remind him about the order life maintenance cost there. But then he goes into the Avermax as predicted, and I have really no way to interact with that because of the Olenoids last turn. So we're just going to have our Dragon bounce the set for fun, and then just go ahead and allow him to set cards and then pass. We draw a copy of Shadow Games, which is decent. It's going to let us at least try and get into our engine to find ways to at least resource cycle, even if we can't immediately out the Avemax, because it can't be destroyed by card effects either, so Construct doesn't deal with it, Alkaline can't target it. There's very, very few ways to out it besides like Gravity Controller, which can. So that's like what I'm looking towards as an out right now. So this will help me get towards like the fusions that I need to. So I'm pretty happy to see this. Like even with order up, I can get to like Schism, and that would be not too bad. But my opponent goes and uses Trap Trick on the end phase, and then gets another copy of Olenoides. So that's gonna hit my Shadow Games here. So there goes another way of me trying to get back into the game. We're just gonna take the 3K here. My opponent also forgets the order again, and also accidentally drew for turn under Reckless there. So we just fix that. And then we go ahead and draw a copy of Ice Dragon's Prison. So this is an out to the Avemax, which is quite nice. So nothing else to help me kind of try and deal with his engine, even if I can't get my own setup. But my opponent has a Heavy Storm Duster in this end phase. So all 3 end phases, he had some sort of backward destruction. Not really anything too surprising, because obviously he's going to play 3 Olenoides. And this card's a pretty decent side in a lot of the back row sort of trap decks right now. Like for mirror matches or trap mirrors like this, right? And he's going to try and chain his Olenoides. I'm going to DD Crow that just to, I don't know, hope to survive. And then we're just going to take the 3K. And then we draw a copy of Strike. So not looking great right now. We're just going to set and then pass. And then my opponent is going to attack into this Squamata. Obviously, we can't target or destroy this Avemax. So we're not in a good spot. And we draw a Cosmic, and that's not going to do it. So we just go ahead and scoop. Yeah, we lost to basically Avemax Beatdown alongside the order that shut down our initial play, and then just continual backward removal, which is definitely, definitely how we were not able to come back in that one. So happens. Not really a whole ton to be said or done about that, except maybe like just the way we sided maybe wasn't ideal. Maybe we should have respected back row a bit more. Putting like Pankratops was an option there. But here we're going to go first, and I actually just don't change my side pattern at all. I just do the same thing. Because like I figure again, I don't really need a fusion or like go for any fusion plays turn 1, because we're just really trying to set traps, and like a lot of my cards are already pretty fine as they are. So I decided to just go ahead and keep things as is. The Cosmic and the DD Crows are fine going first too. So I decided not really any need to change. So let's just go ahead and go first in game 3. So we draw, and our hand is Squamata, Wendy, Shadow Games, DD Crow, and Strike. So we have quite an interesting hand here. We have options to either set Wendy or Squamata to pair with the Shadow Games. And I ultimately end up deciding to set the Wendy, just because I want to. I'm not concerned as much about his monsters, especially if they're like frogs that float, being Dupe Frog, for example, or if they're Paleos that are unaffected by the Squamata anyways. So just getting more engine cards, I feel, is more appropriate. So we're just going to set and pass. My opponent's going to draw for turn and then start with the Pankratops. And this would normally fetch like a strike from me, but I actually let this go because no matter what he pops, I'm fine with it because it's going to be trading 1 for 1. Because if he pops my Wendy, I'm obviously okay with that. If he pops the Shadow Games, I just chain it. If he pops the Strike, I just let it go. So not really anything too devastating there. So my opponent is going to just enter battle phase and attack over the Wendy. I decided to use it and then go for a Beast here. Just trying to draw into the engine a bit more. And then my opponent is going to set 4 and then pass. In the end phase, I'm going to go for the Shadow Games. My opponent is going to chain Ash, but thankfully we actually didn't strike earlier. So we actually have the strike for this Ash. So that actually ended up coming up pretty handy there. So yeah, being a bit more reserved with that. Like I think maybe in a previous format, I would have like maybe striked this, or like in a different scenario, would have striked the Dino Wrestler Pankratops. But yeah, holding the strike there was definitely nice to be able to just make sure I could have the Shadow Games resolve. Because this will allow me to trigger Beast to turn early, and this is actually really good because I'm going to do more stuff in the end phase. So the Dragon hits a Canadia, which obviously is not a very good hit because not only does it get a Paleo into the grave, not only does it not do a whole ton because it just Book of Moons Shaddoll monsters, which isn't good, but it gets a Paleo in the graveyard, which is what he wants. So not a good hit. But we are going to, more importantly, trigger the Beast, which was like the bigger value off the Shadow Games anyway, which lets me send the Squamata, and that allows me to go for the Falco. And here what I'm trying to do is actually just force this Pankratops, because I don't want this Pankratops to linger around the board and just become a looming threat throughout the course of the game. So if my opponent doesn't use the Pankratops to hit the Falco here, I'm going to be able to just really grind super, super well and get like one of these two back, like Wendy or Squamata back. And my opponent knows this, so my opponent's just going to just hit the Falco. But I'm feeling okay here because like even though it's not a great hand in terms of the engine, Punishment is somewhat of an engine card, so I'm feeling all right about it. And my opponent again is starting off pretty slowly here regardless, so I don't feel too badly about it. But it gets even better because we draw the Nadir Serum for turn, which is like one of the best starter cards. If not the best starter card, honestly. It's like the only actual real starter if you think about it. That like does anything by itself without any other conditions. But my opponent is going to chain the order, but thankfully we have the Cosmic that we drew off the Beast. So we are going to chain it and then hit the order, which not only hits the order, but denies the Canadia from being chained. So that's really, really strong. And then we're going to send the app clone to search for a copy of Ecclesia. And then we're going to use the app clone. Here it's a really simplified game state, so I'm like, now is a chance where I could just try and get him down to almost no cards. So we're going to go for the dragon. Unfortunately, my opponent does get to chain Trap Check, which is not the greatest, but it's all right. My opponent goes for a Reckless Greed because there's actually not a whole ton that he could set here that's going to get a lot of value. And here I'm just trying to think. I actually don't summon Ecclesia in main phase 1 just because I want to get the damage in, because any damage is important and I don't want to lose out to TT, Torrential. So we just go and do it in main phase 2. He doesn't have it, so at least now I know that for later on that the set's likely not Torrential. And then we just go ahead and set our punishments and pass. My opponent is going to start up with a copy of Reckless Greed and then try and chain the Paleo. I decided actually just to let this one go because I'm just waiting for a moment to where my opponent is actually going to try and make Toad itself. If he's using this to just wall up, then I don't feel any pressure to use it. Plus, I want some way to use this punishment, or one of these punishments, so I can get more engine cards going, right? Because this time off the app clone, I could like add a Wendy and then pitch it, right? And that would be a great way to actually just turn the game around completely. Now, my opponent here uses Canadia on the Ecclesia, and it's pretty obvious that this is trying to get set up to where my opponent will have a Paleo engraved because he knows I have punishment set. So he's very clearly trying to make it so that he could make a Toad pass punishment because he's definitely got a Frog up there in his hand. So I have an option here to actually have chained the punishment to that Canadia on the field. That way, now that's engraved, it won't be able to activate because the punishment will have been in response to the Canadia before it hit the grave at all. And that would have gotten rid of the Canadia. But then I was thinking, well, I can actually just force my opponent to commit to the board a bit more because my opponent will feel safe now that I haven't used punishment, but I have the DD Crow to stop the Paleo engrave anyways. So even though we'll be using pretty much the same number of resources, I feel better about just him having committed to like a summon of a frog, as long as it's not swap specifically, because then I get punished. But if that does happen, then I could just send the Entis and then pop the other frog if needed, so that's not that big of a deal. But my opponent is going to normal summon a copy of Dupe, and then we go for punishment here, and my opponent is going to attempt to chain the Canadia, but we have the DD Crow for it. So we are going to send App Clone, and I know now my opponent just has no way, unless if there's some really, really weird cards he's playing to get Toad this turn on board. So we are going to use the App Clone to grab Wendy. This is again kind of weird because like we're going to grab the Hedgehog, but we can't really do anything in terms of like getting El Shaddoll fusion since obviously we're going to be under punishment. So that is going to really just grab us like a Schism or a Resh. My opponent's going to set 2, and then we're going to draw a Squamata for turn. And then here I'm trying to just think of what my opponent has. We don't really have any good intel. We just know that it's not Canadia, pretty much. Or most likely not going to be Canadia. So we are going to, and even if it is Canadia, obviously we benefit from it because we're playing Shaddolls, right? But we're going to flip up the Hedgehog, and then we're going to search for actually a copy of Reshadol Incarnation. The reason I don't go for Schism is that if there's a chance that I have to use Dogmatic Punishment here on my turn, for some reason, I don't want to like be randomly locked out of it. Whereas this card is like equally fine in the grind right here because like, I have Falco already in circulation, which is okay. And even though like I can't bring back Alcone, obviously, because neither of them were properly summoned, it's still okay because just the main deck Shaddolls are good enough recursive, or have good enough recursive abilities on their own. So I decide to check for Torrential. I figured my opponent would have probably flipped it there, so I figured that he doesn't have it. So it's going to Nomas Komata, and this is actually 4k plus 15 is 55 plus 8 is 63. So this is actually going to be 6200 damage. My opponent has nothing. So we attempt to go battle phase, and my opponent actually just concedes right here. So yeah, the sets were actually the strike and dimensional barrier, which is pretty interesting just because, again, this deck doesn't really fuse that much. So that's like another reason why I think, you know, you don't really need to play a whole ton of fusions, since I wasn't really fusing that much. It could have been because of the specific lines that I took. And there were plenty of times where I could have deviated from what I actually did. But yeah, this is like a really interesting showcase of like the deck, at least in terms of just being able to grind back and forth. Definitely, I don't think my plays were optimal, but it's kind of hard to pinpoint specific plays that were like suboptimal without having to play the deck, or well, without having to play. Geez, I can't talk right now. Without having played the deck a lot myself in the past, right? So if you guys are like really experienced or seasoned Shaddoll players, definitely be sure to let me know. And if there's anything that you would have changed, I'd be happy to hear about it. But that's going to do it for the video, guys. I know this is a really long one, so I tried to make it relatively fast, but ended up being a 30-minute video anyways. But this match ended up being like 48 minutes, so that is quite the long one. But that's going to do it for the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave a like as well as any thoughts or feedback in the comments. Subscribe for more informative and competitive Yu-Gi-Oh content. If you want to, you can follow me on all social media platforms or support me via Patreon TCG Player. All the links in the description as usual. And until next time, I'll catch you in the next video. See you guys.